little bit and get your views on something that's happening across campuses in the US. Since the murder of George Floyd, we have this moment, and indeed a pressing moment for racial reckoning. And what we find is that a lot of students who felt marginalized on campus and who felt like they couldn't fully participate in campus life have got a voice, have spoken out. And there's been a move to cater to those students, to make them part of campus life. And the typical move is really that universities and colleges are instituting anti-racist and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you make of such initiatives. And, they obviously come from a good place with the intention to make a big difference and to talk about race, an issue perhaps that hasn't been discussed as openly before. But what are your thoughts on how these trainings are unfolding?
There's an awful lot of mendacity involved. And racism can be a subtle thing. Racism is not only somebody calling you a dirty name, it's not only overt discrimination, but I think most people looking on at these initiatives going on college campuses are thinking, are college campuses really such racist places in any sense? Usually you keep it to yourself because you know that you could get mauled saying that out loud in some places. So you just keep it to yourself. But the question everybody's asking is correct. And the answer is no, they're not. College campuses are some of the least racist by any standard places on the entire planet in the whole 300,000-year history of this species, and everybody knows it, including the people living on the campuses. So could a campus improve things in certain ways? Sure, there will be those things, and you have to always watch out for bias. But the idea that because of what happened to George Floyd, which was unjustifiable, that we now have to pretend that these campuses are racist sinkholes, and that that's the way that a certain kind of student ends up feeling significant, to the point that these schools are called on to become anti-racism academies rather than universities? No, I think that that's inappropriate. It's not what I call progress on race. I think that Black students and their allies, as we say it these days, are being catered to because people are afraid. People are afraid if they tell those students no, they're going to get called racists on Twitter. And that scares a lot of people to their socks. And I can put myself in their heads and imagine how it would feel. But it's at the point where, as I've written, we have to temper the demands of these manifestos like that as a way of dignifying the students. To pretend that these campuses are bastions of racism in the way that so many campuses are being asked to now is to condescend, because everybody knows it is true. And so what people are doing is patting bright, young Black students on the head and saying, yeah, this is a terrible racist place, and we're going to attest to it, and we're going to act like this is Ole Miss 50 years ago. It's acting, it's histrionics, it's a dance, it's kabuki, and it's demeaning to the students, and the students themselves will understand it, most of them, in about 10 years when they look back. I've seen that over the decades after protests of this kind. And so I'm just hoping that we can see the pendulum shift to the middle. That's not to say that Princeton might not have some things it might do to address very subtle racism in the background. Sure, but the Princeton letter, where it sounds like Princeton is what Yale was in 1914, there's a word for it. And I'm not going to use a polite word because sometimes the impolite word really is precise. It's bullshit. Everybody knows. I could say malarkey, I could say poppycock, but I don't mean those words. It's bullshit. Everybody knows it. And so we have to get the bravery to call these things out. It has to be white people, it has to be Black people, so that this fashion, because that's what it is, it's a fashion, this fashion passes. There are things we can do about the cops. There are things we can do about various issues having to do with racism. But making Princeton a non-racist campus, changing the racism roiling on Princeton's campus, it's bullshit. And I mean Princeton as a stand-in for any school that's being accused of that right now. It's absurd, and we need to start saying it straight.